So we're going to talk about the causes of the American Revolution. There are quite a few. You guys probably already know some of them. I mean, pretty much a good deal of this you've already been introduced to. So first off, let's talk about the British policies of mercantilism, and that is to establish a favorable balance of trade. We have hit on this earlier in the semester, or really a couple weeks ago when we were talking about exploration. And but now we're going to look at it from Britain's point of view. Britain's major goal, of course, was to export more than they import. That brings in the wealth. You sell more than you buy. Britain controlled the balance of trade by passing various navigation acts over the years. Go look some of those up. You'll see that they're very one-sided, and you'll say, hey, that's not fair. Correct. But they passed them really from like the 1650s to 1760s. So salutary neglect, put a big star by it. You need to know it. This is the policy of Britain avoiding strict enforcement of parliamentary laws, which was meant to keep the American colonies obedient to Great Britain. They actually don't they actually don't enforce harshly or really enforce their laws for about 70 years on the colonists. So basically you have a couple of generations of one generation to two generation of colonists that, you know, they're used to this. Britain's going to pass a tax on us. Well, they're not enforcing it, kind of thing. So keep that in mind. This is a major underlying cause of the American Revolution. Salutary neglect will end with the end of the French and Indian War, and it's going to lead to a bunch of problems. So the French and Indian War, as you see, the French colonized the St. Lawrence River Valley, Quebec, Great Lakes, all the way down to Louisiana. If you look at the picture on the right-hand side, the purple, you see that's France. That's French territory. Interest in trading. They did not want to colonize. They only want to trade with Native Americans. However, if you look, the British, they want to colonize. So who do you think the natives are more worried about, the French or the British? You got it. They're worried about the British. And the British outnumber the French almost 1 million to 70,000 in the 1750s. The French have better relationships with the Indians. As I said, they trade furs. And the military alliances, you might want to make note, they start military alliances as early as 1607, 1608. So when Jamestown was founded, the French were becoming friends with the natives and indeed signing military pacts with them, military alliances. English colonies, of course, want to expand. They said that that little green area over there was too small for them. And the Indians, of course, resisted, and they allied themselves with the French. This is a map, and I used to give this out, or I will give this out again one day, but this is a map. It kind of shows how the claims change. If you look, check out the French areas here, go over here and look at the French areas. You don't see any? Yeah, that's right. The French lose everything. The French and Indian War, as you see, the French and English were old-time rivals. You know this from world history. They fought multiple wars, usually not much come out of them. So definitely the English being in a little bit of a financial bind because they were just getting out of a war, they did not want to fight the French. However, in 1754, the conflict ignites when the French build a fort near the Virginia border. That's in today Pennsylvania, which is Pittsburgh to be the city. They build Fort Duquesne in Pittsburgh, right there where Three Rivers Stadium used to be, in that area. And that used to be part of Virginia. And so the Virginia governor sent George Washington, this guy here, 22 years old, to go find out what was up with the French building in their territory. The French and the Indians won a lot of the early battles. Britain's not even going to enter this war for 2 years. They don't enter the war until late 1755. And as a matter of fact, they called it an illegal war. Once again, they did not want to fight this war because of financial concerns. So in 1754, Benjamin Franklin comes up with this Albany Plan of Union thing. And he said that the colonies, all 8 of them, need to join together and form a central government. And his flag over here, you see the flag right here, It's a snake, and it says join or die. In other words, if the snake is all together, it lives. When you chop snake up, it dies. So in 1759, you have the Battle of Quebec. It's actually fought on the plains of Abraham, right outside of Quebec. The British win this battle, and this is the turning point of the war. And how did the British do this? It's simple. They got Native Americans of their own. The colonists and British had Native Americans of their own. The Iroquois joined the British and the colonists to help fight this war. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris is signed, and look at this. France loses everything in North America. They lose all of their land in North America for right now. Let's see here. There we go. So, as you see here, born out of this war was the idea that the colonies needed to be unified for self-preservation. If you watch this crash course here to help you out with the French and Indian War, goes a little more into it. I've already covered this with you if you've been paying attention, but basically, yes, if the snake is apart, you die. When the snake joins together, it lives. And Benjamin Franklin's the guy who designed the flag. Well, joke's on the British because it's a 9-year war. In British history, you could probably remember studying the 7 Years' War because they only called it 7 years. But the joke's on them. They're going to have to fight a 2-year war, which brings it up to 9 years. And they're going to have to fight it in the Ohio River Valley, or the Ohio Valley, which is right in here. Okay. So they're going to have to fight this war. It's called Pontiac's War, not the car, the Native American. And they fight it from 1763 to 1765. The conflicts were becoming very costly for Britain, and they left over here, stationed 10,000 troops in the territories to control Native Americans after this war. And as you see, they also passed this proclamation line, and it states that the colonists could not cross the Appalachian Mountains in an attempt to avoid a further conflict with Native Americans. Of course, the colonists just simply ignored this law, this act, and they continued to move west. Keep in mind, this is one of those laws that's unenforceable because this Appalachian Mountain chain here is about 1,600 miles long. So it's pretty much unenforceable. It's an unenforceable law. So yes, what came with this victory? A bunch of debt. All right. Britain is heavily in debt because of this war, and they look at it as the colonists drug them into this war, a war they did not want to get into, and so they are going to be looking at the colonists to help them pay for this war. They also leave a standing army over here, and they do this, they say, to protect the colonists from the Native Americans and from the Dutch and all these other guys. Well, the colonists don't see it that way. They say, oh, hey, you're leaving that army over here to suppress our rights. So as you see here, trade restrictions, established levies, established levy duties or taxes on certain products. Smugglers are going to become big at this time, and they had already been there. It's just the British were not harsh on enforcing them. And these smugglers are people who try to avoid paying the taxes. So you need to know what these writs of assistance are. That allow British customs agents to search any ship or building without a search warrant. They could just walk on there and search it. So in 1764, you get the Sugar Act. It affects merchants and traders mostly, but they place duties on certain imports. In other words, they place taxes on certain imports. And this is important. They allow prosecutors to try smuggling cases in vice admiralty courts or British courts. They were tried in colonial courts. Not only that, but the judge, if convicted, gets 5% of all the goods aboard the convicted ship. In other words, the captain loses all of his goods, and 5% of them go to the judge. So definitely a conviction culture there. Tensions tensions after the war. You need to put a story about the Stamp Act, place the direct stamp on every legal document. That would be newspapers, licenses, cards, even dice were taxed. So this affects every one of the colonists. The Sugar Act only affected merchants. The Stamp Act affects everybody. Quartering Act is passed in 1765, and this required colonists to supply British troops with food, good, munitions, and barracks. In other words, the British troops, yes, they can live in your house, and you had to supply them with food, and you had to supply them with munitions, and you had to take care of their clothes and all that good stuff. So, joy to that. That's why you have the Third Amendment and there, the Quartering Amendment, that we have today in our Constitution. So, the resistance begins with the Stamp Act, as you see, Patriots versus Loyalists. The Sons of Liberty, they form in Boston, and Samuel Adams is one of the leaders. John Adams comes along later, and I don't have it in the notes, but you need to know he comes along like in 1772. John Adams early on is not a Sons of Liberty fan. He doesn't agree with it, and he often is at odds with his cousin, Sam. But at any rate, and I put him here because this is about the only time I'm going to really mention these guys. We know them as a great patriot organization. If you look through British literature, they call them a terrorist organization. So they're one of the first terrorist organizations we see, if you go at it from the British point of view. No taxation without representation. The colonists were being denied representation in Parliament, the lawmaking body of the British Empire, and they believed that their rights were being denied to them. And so they said we shouldn't have to pay taxes if we don't even have the right to vote on them or not. So protests and boycotts broke out. Stamp agents were harassed, and eventually this law was repealed simply because Britain went into a depression. 1/3 of the British economy depended on colonial trade, so that's why the law was repealed. British Depression, money. In 1766, they passed the Declaratory Act. You need to put stars by that one. Like I said, Stamp Act, Quartering Act, Declaratory Act, put a star by. And what this does is it says Parliament has the right to declare laws for the British colonies. It takes the colonies' lawmaking ability away from them. Remember, this goes back to Jamestown when they were starting to pass laws. So the colonists see this as a huge threat. And actually, Thomas Jefferson makes a famous statement about this and says, if they pass the Declaratory Act, we'll be virtual slaves to the king and we'll lose all of our rights. Ironic that he would bring that up, because if you don't know, Thomas Jefferson owned 200 slaves. So he was in fear of becoming a slave. He himself owned slaves. It conflicted him the rest of his life, though. 1767, the Townshend Act, as you see, placed the tax on imports such as tea, glass, and paper. This is an indirect tax, whereas the Stamp Act, you have to pay that tax when you buy the goods, like a sales tax. The Townshend Act is more of an indirect tax. It's what we would call like a tariff today. They placed the tax on the goods when they entered the ports. So it's named after him, but the colonists did figure this out. And as you see, they reacted. They protested again, spinning bees and stuff like that. Well, the British sent more troops over. We don't have to go through that. So, Boston Massacre, 1770, protest by the colonists. Basically, the British fire into the crowd. 5 colonists are killed, including African-American or African British citizen Crispus Attucks. So, your version of the story, you may have been told that the British fired into a defenseless crowd. That's not true. Boston was in a depression. People went to the bar. They had one too many, and they got rowdy. They got very mean, and they were just mad that they were in this depression. So they didn't know who to take it out on. They went to the customs house, and they started taking it out on these soldiers. The soldiers asked them all afternoon to leave, and they would not. The story you've heard possibly of the defenseless crowd was actually a made-up story by Samuel Adams, and he did this to rally support of the other colonies. It's called propaganda. Interestingly enough, every one of these soldiers got off, and they were up for first-degree murder in a colonial court, but they walked out of court free men, and their attorney was none other than John Adams. So we'll pick up with part 2 in a minute.